And we're live. Happy Friday. I hope everybody watching is having a wonderful day so far. And today, this little impromptu session is going to be another Neville breakdown, Neville lecture series breakdown. Lately, I have been taking Neville's work and going live to sort of read along and break down or translate, so to speak, his teachings and what he was aiming to say, what he was aiming to get across, uh, mainly due to the fact that Neville's work can be somewhat challenging to understand. So I've taken it upon myself to start the series, and with a lot of wonderful feedback from many of you, this is going to be a continuation of it. And today we're going to read over Neville's lecture titled "Change the Feeling of I," which is one of my favorite lectures from him of all time. It's in my top 5 for sure, because the title says it all. It really is all about that change in self and going further into what entails this change of I and what we want to know and how we want to go about it. So I will be sharing the lecture. I will be reading from the lecture and sharing the screen, and kind of toggling back and forth, reading over some excerpts and highlighting some important notes, and then sort of breaking down what all he is saying and what all it means. Also, the fact that there is a lot of saturation nowadays, a lot of Neville content can be difficult to come across as far as work that is genuinely his, with a lot of AI, a lot of his words are getting lost in translation. So today, I hope you enjoy one of my favorite lectures of all time. Definitely recommend grabbing a pen and paper to take notes. And I also left a link if you want to read along the lecture, if you want to read it over in your own time. That link will be in the description box. I will just be mainly highlighting. I'm not going to go through the lecture in its entirety, due to some time constraints today, but nonetheless, I really wanted to keep this going, again, due to the lovely feedback from all of you. So without further ado, could I go ahead and share the screen and start with changing the feeling of I? And my apologies for not giving this more of an announcement. An opening came up in my day, and it was really impromptu. So I said, you know what, let's just jump on and jump on in. So, changing the feeling of I. And this was a lecture he gave back in 1953, so it was definitely one of his earlier lectures. For the benefit of those who were not present last Sunday, just let me give you a quick summary of the thought expressed here. We claim that the world was a manifestation of consciousness, that the individual's environment, circumstances, and conditions of life were only the outpicturing of the particular state of consciousness in which that individual abides. Therefore, the individual sees whatever he is by virtue of the state of consciousness from which he views the world. Any attempt to change the outer world before he changes the inner structure of his mind is to labor in vain. We'll get to that more in a minute. Everything happens by order. Those who help or hinder us, whether they know it or not, are servants of that law, which constantly shapes outward circumstances in harmony with our inner nature. We asked you last Sunday to distinguish between the individual identity and the state they occupy. The individual identity is the Son of God. It is that I speak of you, or to you, or speak of myself. I mean, really, our imagination. That is permanent. It fuses with the state and believes itself to be the state with which it is fused. But at every moment of time, it is free to choose the state with which it will be identified. There's already so much to go through, but I'm going to keep going for a little bit and we will break this all down. And that brings us to today's subject, changing the feeling of I. And I hope I will not get the same reaction that is recorded in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John. For we are told that when this was given to the world, they all left him, leaving just a handful behind. For when he told them there was no one to change but self, they said this is a hard, hard teaching. It's a hard thing. Who can hear it? For he said, no man cometh unto me, save I call him. And then it's recorded, when he repeated it 3 times, they left him, never again to walk with him. And he turned to the few who remained and asked them, would you also go? And they answered and said, to whom would we go? You have the word of eternal life. In other words, it is so much easier when I can blame another for my misfortune. But now that I am told that no man cometh unto me, save I call him, that I am the sole architect of my fortunes and misfortunes. It's a difficult saying, and so it's recorded. It's a hard saying. Who can hear it? Who can grasp it? And who will believe it? And so he said, and now I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified through the truth. For if this is the truth, then there is no one to change, no one to make whole, no one to purify but self. All right, so I'm going to stop there for a second because I know that was a lot. And just recap a few things that are really important to note. So right off the bat, Neville introduces, of course, with this world that we live in is all just manifestation of our consciousness. Essentially, what we are perceiving, what we are assuming, basically what we are internalizing is what is pictured outwards. And he talks about how the distinguishing between the self, the true self, and the state of consciousness that we are occupying, or that self is occupying, the individual identity and the state that it occupies. Because when we fuse with the state, we believe we are that state. And that's why we are so conditioned and why we are so responsive and reactive to the state that we are dominantly occupying. And then he goes on to talk about the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John. And this is where Jesus was speaking to a group of people and explaining to them, there's no one to change but self. There is no one outside of you that you can point fingers to. And it's said that most of the people in that crowd walked away because this was too difficult of a concept to hear. This was too much for them, and only a few people remained, those which would go on to become his disciples. But essentially, it's saying that this is not an easy thing to do. Our human nature naturally wants to find things on the outside that we can point to as to the cause and condition of our life. We want to be able to say, oh, because of this thing over here, this is why my life sucks. This is, this person is making things so difficult for me. It's so easy to shift blame onto another. And what Neville's saying here, and what it's saying in this, the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, is that we cannot do that anymore. We cannot do that anymore. So I really want to note this because there's a lot of there's ideas that go around that this is supposed to be super, super easy. A lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, manifestation is so easy. This is, ridiculously simple. And not so much. Not so much. I mean, for some, it'll be easier than others. But if you are somebody who has had some difficulty with this, if you're somebody that has struggled with this, you're not alone. You're not alone in that. So it all starts with first changing the feeling of I. And lastly, he talks about any attempt to change the outer world before we change the inner structure of our mind is to labor in vain. That's a point that we need to etch into our brain. That is a point we need to write down over and over again. Trying to change the outside before we have changed this is futile and a waste of time. But let's continue. And now, how do we go about changing the I? First of all, we must discover the I, and we do this by an uncritical observation of self. This will reveal a self that will shock you. You will be altogether, I wouldn't say afraid, but ashamed to admit you've ever known such a lowly creature. Neville had a way with words. And had it been God himself who drew near this despicable form, you would have denied him 1,000 times before a single cock would crow. You couldn't believe that this is the self that you've carried around and protected and excused and justified. Then you start changing this self after, by an uncritical observation, you make the discovery of that self. For the acceptance of self is the essence of the moral problem of the world. It is the epitome of a true outlook on life, for it is the sole cause of everything you observe. Now, for those who watch my channel, for those who have been following me, you know I speak all the time about the importance of self-observation. And this is why, because it's not until we really start to observe what we are naturally thinking and reacting to and what we are ruminating on, it's not until we start to really take an objective look at this that we will see a self that we may not have been aware of before. We may not know until we are observant just how critical we are. If we hold on to anger, resentment, again, criticism of ourself or others, we may have an idea of, we may think ourselves to be a certain way. We might think, oh, I'm kind, I'm loving, I'm compassionate. And that may be true, but you may also have a lot of things that you were not aware of. This certainly happened to me. So the very first thing that we must do is really start to take that uncritical and objective observation of self. And this will reveal why things are happening in your world the way that they are. And let's continue. Your description of the world is a confession of the self that you do not know. You describe another. You describe society. You describe anything. And your description of the thing you observe reveals to one who knows this law the being you really are. So you must first accept that self. When the self is accepted, then you can start to change. It is so much easier to take the virtues of the gospel and apply them as the word of life, to love the enemy, to bless those who curse us, and to feed the hungry. But when man discovers the being to be fed, the being to be clothed, the being to be sheltered, the greatest enemy of all is that self, then he is ashamed, completely ashamed that is the being, for it was easier to share with another something that I possess, to take an extra coat and give it to another. But when I know the truth, it's not that. I start with the self, having discovered, and start with change of that self. So again, he's saying it is much easier when we are able to do things for others or point to others. It's easier when we can just say, oh yeah, here's the coat off my back. Here's, doing things for others, right? Versus turning inward and really starting with the self. This is, again, not something that comes very easy and natural to us. So we have to bear that in mind. And then he goes on to tell a story about one of his followers. And I'm just going to kind of summarize the story. Again, if you want to read through all of it, I have the link to this lecture down below. But he gives a story about there was a gentleman that would follow him, that would go to his lectures. This was several years before he gave this lecture. And he went up to Neville after one of the lectures and started talking to him about the law and no one to change but self, and that we have the power to change our world. And this man was a black man. And this had to have been back in the 1940s. So the man was like, well, Neville, I would love to say that this is something that could come easy for me, but I due to the color of my skin, I'm very discriminated against. I'm looked at like a second-class citizen. And Neville goes on to talk to him about the story of Abdullah and explaining to him about his mentor, Abdullah, who was also a black man back in the 1920s when they started working together. And Abdullah was just a gangster. Abdullah did not care. He walked like he just owned the place because he did. And everywhere he went, he was always like the center of attention. He was always, he would always be able to get into places, and he was VIP wherever he went. This was, back when. But so Neville's telling the story of Abdullah to this gentleman, and trying to explain to him it truly is nothing to change except for how we are perceiving what we are assuming, right? So and of course the man has difficulty accepting this, naturally. And I'm gonna continue off from that point. So he talks to the man, and then Neville says, he tells a story about that man, and then Neville says, well, that man went away and wrestled with himself. He couldn't believe everything I told him, not that night. But last Sunday morning in the lobby, he came forward and we renewed the friendship. He took me next door and showed me the fruit of this teaching. He said, Neville, it took me almost 3 years to really overcome that fixed idea that I, by the accident of birth, would be a secondary citizen. But I overcame it. Now here is my office on Wilshire Boulevard. I picked this one not because it was the only one offered. 4 equally wonderful spots were offered to me. I took this one because it had greater telephone facilities, but the others were equally good. Now here is my office. Now you couldn't judge my income from the office, lovely as it is. Everything is nice about it, but Neville, this year I will net $250,000. Well, in America, that is still a fabulous sum of money. It would be staggering in any other part of the world, but even in fabulous America, a man to net $250,000 is really up in the very highest of brackets. And that was the man that a few years ago told me the whole vast world was against him by reason of the accident of birth. He knows now he is what he is by virtue of the state of consciousness with which he is identified. And the choice is his to go back to the restrictions of his childhood when he believed the story, or to continue in the freedom that he has found. So you and I can be anything in this world we desire to be if we clearly define our aim in life and constantly occupy that aim. It must be habitual. So I just want to note a couple things really quick that are important there. So in that story, the man who had came to him at first and said, Neville, I would love to be able to say that success can come easily, but given my circumstances, that's just not possible. And so the man went away and wrestled with this idea for 3 years. And I think that's important to note because a lot of us struggle with the concept of time and how much time it takes. And it just goes to show not everything is super instant, depending on, how thoroughly subscribed we are to a certain concept. Like the stronger the belief, it can really feel difficult to accept something different than what we have always known. And I'm not saying that to say that it's going to take you 3 years to overcome beliefs or anything like that, but nonetheless, this gentleman overcame those old stories, those old conceptions that he had had since birth, and went on to get an office on Wilshire Boulevard. And for those who know Los Angeles, Wilshire Boulevard, that's some good real estate. And netting $250,000 back in 1953, good amount of money. So it really is an incredible story that can go to show no matter what we might perceive as impossible for us is truly impossible for us. Let's continue. So you and I can be anything in this world we desire to be if we will clearly define our aim in life and constantly occupy that aim. It must be habitual. This part's important. The concept we hold of self that is noble must not be put on just for a moment and then taken off when we leave this church. We feel free here. We feel that we have something in common. That's why we are here. But are we going to wear the noble concept we now hold of self when we go through the door and enter that bus? Or are we going to return to the restrictions that were ours prior to coming here? The choice is ours, and the hardest lesson to learn is that there is no one in this world that can be drawn into your world unless you, and you alone, call him. Also, really important to note here, we must constantly occupy that aim. It must be habitual. We cannot just put ourselves in that state momentarily and then return back to our old way of thinking a few minutes later or a couple hours later. That's not how this works. We can't just, for a moment, occupy that new state and then go right back to our old ways of thinking and our old patterns. So Neville asks, like, how many of you here are going to wear this state even after you leave here tonight, even after you get on the bus to go home? How many of you here are going to actually continue to wear this new state and not return back to the old garments, to the old self? And the choice is ours, and the hardest lesson to learn is that there is no one in the world that could be drawn into your world unless you and you alone call him. So once again, he's saying there is no one to change but self. That everyone is ultimately us pushed out anyways. So do not do what they did thousands of years ago, for that is the beginning of the cessation of the great truth. So we are told they turned away from it, never again to walk with it. And the few who remained didn't like it either. But where would they go if this is the word of eternal truth? Not that it's true for this day and age, but if this is the law of being, and in all the dimensions of my being it holds good, if this is eternally true, then let me learn the lesson now, though I wrestle with myself as he did for 3 years. So again, he's saying, even though it may be difficult to accept now, if this is the law of being, if this is the law that operates from any dimension, any version of self, then let me learn it now. Yeah, even if I may wrestle with it. Basically, what is the alternative? If this is eternally true, if this law of being is eternally true, then let me learn the lesson now, even if it's difficult. So the changing of the feeling of I is a selective thing because unnumbered states are infinite states, but the I is not the state. The I believes itself to be the state when it enters and fuses with it. So he was presented with a state and without the faculty of discrimination in his youth. He fused with the state and believed these restrictions were true. And it took him 3 years to disentangle the I from these fixed ideas with which he had lived with for so many years. Now, you may take only a moment, or you too may take your 3 years. I can't tell you how long it's going to take you, but I'll tell you this much. It can be measured by the feeling of naturalness. You can wear a feeling until it's natural. The moment the feeling becomes natural, it will begin to bear fruit within your world. Another word you hear me toss around a lot on this channel is the feeling of naturalness. Once again, Neville's saying here, we don't know how long it is going to take for ourselves specifically to truly accept that we can disentangle the I from our old states. We can change our beliefs and assumptions. We do not have to continue to carry with us and accept all of the old limitations. And it may take only a moment to overcome. It may take, like this gentleman, years. We don't know. Neville says, I can't tell you how long it's going to take you, but I'll tell you this much. It can be measured by the feeling of naturalness. So he's saying, however long it's going to take until it feels natural, until what you are imagining and what you are desiring feels natural for you. So I told this story at a small gathering here in the city, and not very many people asked questions about it, but 3 people asked, but he must have had money before. He must have known the right people. He must in some way have had the substance to start it, because how can you go out to loan $100 million and call that a real fact of being that you have that you have that to loan and tell me you don't have someone who had it or you yourself didn't have it? I did not ask the gentleman about the individual facts of the case. I went into the office. I saw it. I didn't look at his books. He volunteered this information. It gave me the figure of $250,000 net for the year. I have not checked or in any way verified the statement, but I believe it implicitly. But I will not go along with those who will believe that unless you have certain things to start with, you can't apply this law. That's an important point to note. When he was telling the story to some people, there were a couple naysayers that were like, oh, he must have had somebody to help him with this. He must have had the money beforehand. There's just no way that he could just get the money to lease this building. And Neville's saying, look, I saw the office. He volunteered this information. He told me such and such, and I'm not going to, and I believe it implicitly. And I will not go along with those who believe that unless you have certain things to start, you can't apply this law. Basically, he's saying, don't condition anything. Do not condition what you are believing or assuming that you need to have certain things before you can see certain outcomes, that you need to have all this money in the bank before you can get this outcome. That's what he's saying here. I will not entertain that you need to have this before you can do that, basically. You can start now from scratch and choose the being you want to be. You aren't going to change the pigment of your skin, but you will find your accent or the pigment of skin or your so-called racial background will not be a hindrance. For if a man is ever hindered, it can only be the state of consciousness in which he abides that hinders him. Man is freed or constrained by reason of the state of mind in which he persists. If you persist in it, well, then I will say, persist in it. But I warn you, no one cares, and that is an awful blow when a man discovers that no one but himself really cares. So we find ourselves weeping with ourselves in the hope of getting others to weep with us. And what an awful shock when the day arrives, we discover that no one really ever cared. They will give us some little listening ear for a moment, just as they were passing by, but they didn't really care. When we make that discovery, we shake ourselves out of it and boldly appropriate the gift our Father gave us before that the world was. So, a couple things that I want to note here really quick. He makes a note here about how you can start from scratch and choose who you want to be. You aren't going to change the pigment of your skin, but you will find that your accent or, all of these things will not be a hindrance. A couple people have taken that to mean Neville had limiting beliefs around what is possible. The way in his speaking style, what he's trying to say there is you don't have to change like a physical appearance about you in order to see the outcome that you want, right? You don't have to like actually create these conditions in order to see something change. So again, when you read enough Neville, you will kind of get familiar with his way of words. But Neville made it abundantly clear many, many times that there is no impossibility. There is no, you can't experience this. You can't do this. Many, many times he said that there's no limitations unless we assume that we have limitations. And when he talks about how no one cares, he's referring again to the fact that we're not, when we come into this law, when we come into these teachings, one of the first and most difficult things is accepting that We can't turn to another. We can't shift things onto somebody else, right? That really is something that at first we wrestle with, um, because we want to feel like, we can look to these external circumstances and give, like, use it as reason. Basically, we want to be able to say, oh, because of this, because of that, this is why I'm stuck, and this is why I am where I am, this is why I can't move forward. And so he's repeating over and over in this lecture that no, we cannot do that anymore. Like, we have, it is full responsibility. Is there is For if a man is ever hindered, it can only be the state of consciousness with which we abide that hinders us. But let's continue. When we make that discovery, we shake ourselves out of it and boldly appropriate the gift our Father gave us before that the world was. So let me show you the gift. You've read your Lord's Prayer possibly daily, but you've read it as a prayer from a translation of a translation which does not reveal the sense of the evangelist. The real translation you will find in Forrest Fenton's work, where in the original it is written in the imperative passive mood, which is like a standing order, a thing to be done absolutely and continuously, so that you can look now upon your universe as one vast intricate machinery where all things happen. There isn't a thing to become. All things are taking place. So it is written in this manner: Thy will must be being done. Thy kingdom must be being restored. It is the only way you could express it, if you would express the imperative passive mood. But from the Latin, from which our translation was made, there is no first aorist of the imperative passive mood. So we have it in the way we have it, but it does not reveal the intent of the mysteries. If you will see all things are now, that you don't become, you simply select the state that you would occupy. That part's important. Occupying it, you seem to become, but it is already a fact. Every aspect of that state in its most minute detail. It's worked out and taking place. You, by occupying the state, seem to go through the action of detail. The action of unfolding that state, but the state is completely finished and taking place. So now you can choose the being you want to be, and by choosing a being other than what you are now expressing, you start to change the feeling of I. Once again, talking about how creation is already finished. Everything is already in existence. So if we see all things are already in existence now, there is no becoming. There is no needing to change or fix. There's only selecting the state. So that's a way that we want to start to look at this. Not that I need to change my circumstances, but I need to select a new state entirely, which should bring us relief because it certainly feels more difficult at the idea that we have to change other people or that we have to change our circumstance, when this is all just selection. This is all just selection, ultimately. You, by occupying the state, seem to go through the action of unfolding that state, but the state is completely finished. So it's going to seem like actions are taking place out here in this physical world. It's going to seem like things are kind of unfolding and progressing in a linear fashion, but it is already existing now. And that's what we mean when we say it is already done. And I know we get very confused on that because we're used to this linear time and actions playing out, but in truth, what you desire is already in existence right now. All we are doing is selecting that state and wearing that feeling. That is how we start to change the feeling of I. All right, this one is an important paragraph, probably the most important paragraph in all of this, so take note. Now, how will I know that I have changed the feeling of I? By beginning first with an uncritical observation of my reactions to life, and then noticing my reactions when I think I am identified with my choice. If I assume that I am the man that I want to be, let me observe my reactions. If they are as they were, I have not identified myself with my choice, for my reactions are automatic. And so if I am changed, I would automatically change my reactions to life. So the changing the feeling of I results in a change of reaction, which change of reaction is a change of environment and behavior. But let me warn you now, a little alteration of mood is not a transformation. It's not a real change of consciousness. Because as I change my mood for the moment, it can quickly and rapidly be, I would say, replaced by another mood in the reverse direction. When I say that I was changed, as that gentleman changed his mood, his basic mood, his state of consciousness, it means that having assumed that I am what the moment denied, what my reason denied, that I remain in that state long enough to make that state stable, so that all of my energies are flowing from that state. I am no longer thinking of that state. I am thinking from that state. So that whenever a state grows so stable as to definitely expel all of its rivals, then that central, habitual state of consciousness, from which I think defines my character and is really a true transformation or change of consciousness. Whenever I reach that state of stability, watch my world mold itself in the harmony with this inner change. And men will come into my world, people will come to aid, and they will think that they are initiating the urge to help. They are playing only their part. They must do what they do because I have done what I did, having moved from one state into the other. I have altered my relationship relative to the world round about, and that changed relationship compels a change in behavior relative to my world. So they have to act differently towards me. Okay. Let me finish this part here. So in changing the I, you start with desire, which we will unfold and elaborate on tomorrow night. For it starts with desire. Desire is the spring of action, for you must want to be other than that which you are. We fail because we do not fall in love enough with an idea. We aren't, I would say, moved enough to want to be other than what we are. If I could get you to be completely in love with some state to the point where it haunted the mind, I could almost prophesy that you would, in the not too distant future, externalize that state within your world. And the reason we fail, we aren't hungry enough to change. For either we do not know the law or we haven't the urge or the hunger to really bring about the change. Okay. So, reactions. How do we know that we have changed this feeling of I? We'll know based on our reactions. This is, again, where self-observation becomes so important, because whatever I am reacting to is automatic. My reactions are automatic. We don't have the conscious control over them. So if I'm reacting the same as from my old state, then I have not fully changed that feeling of I. I have not changed my self-concept. Because as I begin to change that feeling of I, that self-concept, my reactions are going to automatically change. I am no longer going to react the same as I did from that old state of being. So if I was somebody that was once very short-tempered, very quick to react angrily, if I got angry very easily, and I'm still noticing that to be true, I'm still observing that, then I have yet to really fully change that dominant state that I occupy. And he also talks about how this is not about a little alteration of mood, right? Because we may move into that new state and then find ourselves falling right back out again. So that's not a real transformation. He talks about that's not a real change of consciousness. Um, Let me see here. It means that I have assumed that I am what the moment denied, what my reason denied, that I remain in the state long enough to make that state stable. So the aim is to continue to go back to that state, go back to that feeling, go back in imagination to who you want to be and be that person. Think from that state for as you are that person now. And once that state becomes stable, so that you are naturally reacting and responding as you were from that state, that's how we know an inner change has taken place. So it's all based on our reactions. How do we know if we've changed our self concept? How do we know if this is working? How do we know if we're doing it right? Your reactions. Your reactions. Trying to simplify this. And he also talks about how the reason we fail, we aren't hungry enough to change. I know that this one might be a little, and it might even rub some people the wrong way, because obviously we all have desire to change. That's why we're here. What Neville's saying, though, is the desire to change must be stronger than um, what's the word I'm looking for? Nature to stay the same. As human beings, we're very much resilient to change. From that ego self, the ego mind does not at all like the idea of change. It is much easier for us to just remain in the same old familiar state, even if it's not ideal. So he's saying that the desire needs to be stronger than our will to just stay the same, because that's going to be much easier to do. Falling back into old ways of being, that complacency, what feels normal already, that's going to feel easier to do. Now I see my time is coming to a quick end. And so in the time remaining I have left, let me not urge you, because if you come to the meeting tomorrow night, not really hungry, you wouldn't benefit. But I do hope that many of you are there. Even if you're stirred to the point of trying to, I would say, disprove what I told you, I would accept that challenge, for in that attempt to disprove it, I know if you were sincere in your attempt, you would prove it. So I hope many of you will come back and take this feast with us. It talks about, coming back to the next meeting. Tomorrow night to me is basic. It is the importance of defining an aim in this world, having a goal. For without an aim, you are aimless. And you were warned in the book, or I would say, in the epistle of James, that the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Let not such a man believe that he shall receive anything of the Lord, for he is like a wave that is driven and tossed by the wind. That man never reaches his goal. So you must have an aim. And tomorrow night we will show you the importance of defining desire. There are certain schools which teach you to kill out desire. We teach you to intensify desire and show you the reason for such teaching. Show you what the Bible teaches about desire. So, an important thing to note about being the double-minded man. Have a goal, define your aim, do not be aimless. That is, get very clear and familiar with not just what you want, but the version of you who has it. What would that version of you be doing? How would you be thinking? What would your life look like? Really define and get clear on what that is, so we're not tossed all over the place. And now we will come to the help that many of you have asked for today. Those who were not here on Sunday, let me remind you, it is a very simple technique. As I told you on Sunday, anytime that you exercise your imagination and do it lovingly on behalf of another, you are mediating God to man. So we sit quietly and we simply become imitators of our Father. And he called the world into being by being the thing he would call. And so we sit and we listen as though we heard someone congratulating us on having found what we seek. So we go to the end of the matter and we listen just as though we heard, and we look as though we saw, and we try in this manner to feel ourselves right into the situation of our answered prayer. And there we wait in the silence just for about 2 minutes. And so they will lower the lights to aid you. And let me remind you, if you want to clear your throat, please do so. If you want to shift your position in the chair, do so. Feel you feel as though you are alone at home, because if you don't, and you try not to disturb the neighbor, you will not be able to exercise your imagination on behalf of anyone. So now I will take the chair and just simply listen attentively, just as though you heard. I'll make you this promise. The day you are very still in mind and really become attentive, you will hear as coming from without what you really are whispering from within yourself. So just in that last paragraph, he's talking about how we apply the technique. Basically, in imagination, you go to the end, you either hear the congratulations, you see the outcome as though it's already come to pass. Essentially, you just allow yourself to experience that end state in imagination. And he's just kind of walking through those steps. He also made a point about don't worry about clearing your throat. If you need to shuffle, if you need to move yourself to get more comfortable, do so. Don't worry about trying to keep totally still, because if you try to, if you're rigid, if you're not relaxed, it's going to feel difficult to imagine. You're not going to be able to exercise your imagination on behalf of anyone. So basically he's telling people, get relaxed and go to the end. And that is changing the feeling of I. So again, I love this one because, number one, it is very simple and straightforward. And I love sharing the ones that are simple and straightforward. Some of Neville's lectures can get very intricate, a bit more advanced, if you will, especially when he starts speaking more on the promise. I will absolutely go into some of those lectures if anyone is interested. Just drop a comment below if that's the case. But I think it's important that we go back to the source of this. Again, there's a lot of saturation out there. There's a lot of things that are getting sort of blended in with his teachings. And it's causing a lot of confusion. It's causing a lot of overwhelm. So this is going to be just another part of my series that I've been making, this ongoing series where we just break down Neville's work, talk about it, and really begin to see how we could start to implement this in our world and the important things that we need to know in order to successfully implement this in our world. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all for joining me who are live here today with me. For those of you watching after the fact, I hope you enjoyed as well. Each and every one of you, take care. Have an excellent rest of your Friday ahead. And until next time, bye guys.